Hoover felt giving direct help to needy Americans would undermine their self-respect and looked to private charities to help the hungry. Instead, he approved more than $2 billion in emergency financing to businesses, hoping their renewed success would trickle down to the people who needed assistance. It didn't. Rather, unemployment rose even higher, and Americans were caught in a web of despair.
All right, crew, let's see if you can get my shirt this time for the students to see. I don't know which camera. Should I go into this camera over here? Yes, there we go. There we go. You see there, capitalism, in this particular case, capital isn't. Let's appreciate something about the Great Depression. And again, this is the struggle that, what we're seeing is the second generation of immigrants that have been coming into the United States. Now they're coming of age in the 1930s, and then now they're struggling to survive. And let's understand something about the immigrant who gave up his life to fight in World War I for the United States. Because as the Great Depression evolved, the anger of the veteran of the First World War, now without work, his family hungry, led to what eventually is going to be called by historians the March of the Bonus Army to Washington. And they did that in the spring and summer of 1932. World War I veterans migrated to Washington, D.C. from all over the country to demand redress. So we're going to visit a documentary that is entitled The March of the Bonus Army that's sponsored by the Disabled American Veterans. Let's go to the documentary.
America was not prepared when it entered World War I in 1917. Fighting the Germans required young American men by the millions, and the only way to get them was through conscription.
The American Army, for the first time in its history, will be composed of a majority of conscripted troops. And when the draft is explained to the American people, it's called selective service.
Some men were selected to fight, others to work in needed defense industries, or as farmers.
So it's a different conception of military service as work, as opposed to just simply a civic duty.
The first American troops arrived in France in June of 1917. In just 18 months, nearly 100,000 lost their lives. 200,000 more were wounded or gassed. Also, over there, were hundreds of thousands of African American soldiers. Barred from combat with American units, many fought courageously under the French flag.
For the first time, many of these people experienced what it was like to be treated as fully human beings by white people.
When the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, most of the Americans that had served would never be the same. As the first waves of troops returned from Europe, the nation turned out to honor them with parades. But veterans quickly realized the high price they had paid.
Let's say a guy didn't go to war, stayed home, worked in an arms factory. He would probably get maybe 10 times as much as a soldier would. Soldier in combat was getting about a buck and a quarter a day.
Soon after the war, veterans began to argue that soldiers should be compensated for the wages they lost while serving their country.
They very carefully used the terms adjusted compensation to be clear that what they are asking for is not a bonus, they are asking for back wages that are due to them. It was the detractors who called it a bonus.
Finally, in 1924, Congress granted World War I veterans adjusted universal compensation.
A law had granted them the bonus, equivalent to $1 to $1.25 a day for every day they served, which in many cases would be $600, $800, $1,000.
But there was a catch.
They don't get a nickel of the money until 1945, unless they die. That's what they call it, the Tombstone Bonus.
In 1928, Herbert Clark Hoover, a self-made millionaire, was elected president. In his inaugural address, Hoover proclaimed that the future of the country was bright with hope. Just 7 months later, the stock market collapsed and the country descended into the Great Depression. In America, in 1932, hunger and desperation stalked the land. 25% of workers were unemployed, and many were veterans. One of them was Walter W. Waters, down on his luck in Portland, Oregon.
He had been a sergeant in the war, and that's an indication that you were a pretty good soldier. And there were a lot of veterans sitting around trying to find what to do next.
Then came a ray of hope. A bill calling for an immediate cash payment of the veterans' bonus was introduced in Congress. Waters became obsessed with it.
During this time, I was anxiously watching reports in the newspapers of the progress of bonus legislation. And I noticed that the highly organized lobbies in Washington were producing results, regardless of the justice or injustice of the demand.
At a meeting of jobless veterans, Waters stood up and urged them to march on Washington.
And when that happened, it kind of clicked for these guys. Eventually, there were about 300 of them. And they go down to the railroad yard to hop freights. And they go all the way across the country to Washington.
Once I built a railroad, I made it run.
They called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force, or BEF, a play on the American Expeditionary Force, the collective name for the troops sent to France. But soon, they were simply known as the Bonus Army. They carried knapsacks, or duffel bags, or bedrolls, with tin cups dangling. They had $30 among them. Meanwhile, word of the BEF was spreading. Even as Waters and his men were heading towards the Capitol, 25 vets from Tennessee were circling the White House in a truck bearing the sign, "We want our bonus."
And they start from everywhere. They start from Los Angeles, they start from Las Vegas, they start from Mississippi and Texas. They come from everywhere.
Antonio Oliver, a veteran gassed in the Argonne Forest in France, drove from Pennsylvania with his twin sons, Nick and Joe.
My dad got word to march on Washington and thump the tub for the bonus that they promised the veterans in 1924.
And I think it was approaching dawn when he got there. And my father woke us up and says, "There's the Capitol building." I never forgot that.